So what distinguishes a great story from a meager, forgettable one? Why is it after investing 8 hours of time do we know so little about the core cast of Reservation Dogs? Why is it important to include characterization between poorly written scenes of comedy? Hopefully we're going to tackle some of this in this video. So obviously you're here to listen to an awesome critique of Reservation Dogs coming from a native perspective. I'm going to break down some of the things about this show that were done reasonably well and others that were horribly mishandled. I'd like to discuss issues like a circular narrative as well as the botching of the way that these characters were written. I'm hopefully going to give you an idea of why it seems to be that only natives or those watching this show strictly for representation's sake seem to be the only ones singing the show's praises. It seems that the writer of this show decided against following traditional means of storytelling in constructing a strong, cohesive narrative, giving us little in the way of plot and highlighting why it is that characterization is so important, especially when introducing the viewers to a story and keeping them invested over a full season. Okay, this may come off as I'm somehow unsupportive of native programming, which is totally not my intention. I'd like to discuss how Res Dogs could still possibly be improved by addressing some of these structural issues that other viewers may feel somewhat uncomfortable in critiquing honestly. Minority box checking seems to take precedent over creating a structured plotline. When representation becomes the sole focus of a story, the story itself suffers. The viewers will not connect to the characters, though they can't put their fingers on exactly what it is that's wrong. The problem being that the writer hasn't conveyed who these characters are in lieu of creating instances of shallow humor that itself becomes redundant if it's not building towards anything. I've searched the depths of YouTube in an attempt to find an honest critique of Reservation Dogs, and oh, believe me, it was hard. There are reviews that simply cheer this show on, but refuse to discuss any of the show's weaknesses. The race or sexuality should not become the whole of who a character is and make up the whole of the problems or issues that they are facing. Sure, it can be a part of what causes the character to view the world with a certain lens, but aside from that, we need to be introduced to the world and how the character interacts within it, giving us an idea of who these people are, what's important to them. At the very least, we need to be provided a goal that they are striving towards. I waited. I tried to give it a full season to pull itself together, to round out these characters and fix some of the narrative issues that seemed to go nowhere. I believed that by the end of the season, I would be able to recommend this show to those who had yet to see it without cringing or needing to pause and explain why a certain scene was supposed to be funny to my non-native friends. We need complexity when representing a culture. This isn't a sitcom after all. So taking this into account, what are the themes explored in Reservation Dogs? Why is this story important? And no, the answer shouldn't be because the entire cast is indigenous and native people need a voice, since we're tragically underrepresented. The lack of native protagonists isn't the issue. It's the fact that many native-centric storylines are rushed and care isn't given to what the writer wants to deliver. Storytelling is something crucial to how the American public understands a culture that they may not inherently understand. Not because they don't care, but because the stories aren't worth the time that it needs to be invested into this story, because it seems to go nowhere. If the writer doesn't care about the narrative or the characters, why should anyone else? Most of the beats that are meant to be comedic relief between the drama are so poorly delivered that non-native viewers are often unable to understand just why the natives are laughing. It's not supposed to be funny simply because it's crazy and unexpectedly random. I have a feeling that the writer took certain concepts from hits like Orange is the New Black, then attempted to use these pieces as inspiration. Toss in a few native actors, slap them on a res somewhere in Oklahoma, and then hope for the best. Orange is the New Black was praised not because of a chicken wandering around the prison yard. The chicken was there to highlight who each character was by how they reacted to such a strange plot thread. It introduced us to the world, and then it led somewhere. Okay, let's talk about Bear, the main character of this show. He's a young native boy attempting to find a path off the reservation somewhere in Oklahoma. That's it. I literally had to look up the additional cast's names after watching a whole season, but this is beside the point. Okay, Bear, being raised by a single mom, wants to go to Cali. Why? Well, 'cause his friends want to go, I suppose. He's a good friend, though none of his actions tell us this about him. I'm kind of just guessing. His most interesting plot line is his interaction with a vision of an unknown warrior. This is what distinguishes him from the others. When out of the blue one day, he has a vision of a warrior. Why is this? Does it run in his family? Is there some unaddressed part of his psyche taking the form of this warrior? We don't know. Matter of fact, no one does. Apparently not even the writer. It was just a funny scene that the writer wanted to portray in the show. The warrior's appearance doesn't even seem to symbolize anything. He just appears. You know, when they need a funny scene. You remember him, right? He's funny. Well, here he is again. Most of the side characters suffer from this stereotype problem. So, is Bear a leader or a follower? Is he a good person? Well, no better or worse than the rest of his friends. Things just kind of happen to him. He in no way pushes the narrative forward. He makes no choices that backfire. He's just kind of along for the ride. I remind you, this is the main character, the protagonist of this show. He then has a plot thread with his dad, a failed rapper who he rarely sees, whom we also know little about. Is he successful, or does he just pretend to be? Does Bear support him, or is he angry with him? What does he feel about him other than generically missing him? Bear's mother is also very oddly written. She blacks out after a night at the bar and awakens in a white man's house that we see is far fancier than what she is normally accustomed. She's obviously impressed with herself. He's rich, she mutters, something extremely important to her when finding a new daddy for her son. Yet when we meet him, he is written to be so unrealistically racist with a tattoo of an eagle feather and a Confederate flag on his arm. So one might ask themselves, what is the moral of this episode? Well, don't wander home in a drunken state, arm in arm with a rich racist white man who owns a former plantation, who also happened to own Native American slaves, I guess? So had she not seen this, would she have stayed? Are we meant to ignore the fact that blacking out at a bar and waking up in a stranger's house is meant to be somehow enduring? Is she a bad mother? What does Bear feel about any of this? Does she want or need to be taken care of? She was wooed by Bear's father, staying with him and having a son with him, so her choice in men is questionable at best. Does she neglect Bear in some way? Is that what fuels him to leave? Well, obviously no, because by the midpoint of the season, he's sleeping on her shoulder. Suddenly he doesn't want to leave. So we're left in the same place by the end of the season as we were at the very beginning, knowing all of the things that we already knew about all of these characters. This occurs again and again with each of the core cast. So let's talk about Cheese. The only other male of the group is an orphan. He's apparently being raised by some other members of his family whom we never see and he never speaks of. Do we know how he feels about this? Well, no. We see that he apparently has a follower since he's willing to follow his friends to Cali for some reason. He's meant to be, I guess, the stupider member of the group, leaving a funnel in the enemy gang's car that he's used to pour sugar into their gas tank with his name on it. So, let's take a closer look at one of the full episodes with Cheese and the policeman character, who's written to be a traditional type person. This cop, when asked when he wanted to become a policeman, answers with a strange cautionary tale of his encounter with a deer woman, another side plot that has no real apparent purpose. The policeman is the one whom the episode revolves around, and he is sent to the store by a family member, not because he decided to. While there, he just happens to be in a bathroom stall when the hooves of a mysterious, mystical deer woman suddenly appear to deliver him toilet paper. By the end of the episode, he decides to be a cop because the deer lady told him to. There's no passionate or tragic backstory to why he decided to become a police officer. She just tells him that he's a good guy who's meant to help out other people. This story highlights one of the core issues that seem to show up in abundance regarding the lack of integrity or moral failings of those that are meant to be the main characters, whom we are supposed to empathize with and cheer on. The deer lady seems to only kill immoral men, leaving those who she deems good people alone. So by the end of the episode, as she is hitchhiking her way into another scumbag's heart, are we supposed to cheer her on? This isn't only a problem with the writing of the deer woman who murders men on a whim, but also the core cast, whom we see steal on a regular basis, not only from rich white people, but indigenous store owners being chased out by an angry Indian cashier. They don't steal because they are starving and they have no money. They do it because it's fun, running out with armloads of snacks with huge smiles on their faces. This gives the audience, who in reality may have never met an Aboriginal person, a false idea of what Native youth are really like. The supporting of bad stereotypes is normally not something that the writer aims for when creating a protagonist. Now we're going to move on to Willie, many of the viewers' favorite character. Though most can't tell me exactly why they do like her other than, I know a girl that's just like her. Not good enough. Sure, she delivers quippy dialogue like, "Skoden," or after the uncle says he lives off the land, she answers dryly, "Sure looks like you go to Sonic a lot." This is an observation, not a joke, and tells us little about who she is. I wikied the show and only then am told that Willie is a tomboy, though she isn't any more or less of a tomboy than Alora. But since it's on the wiki, I suppose this is canon. The only one-on-one time that we spend with Willie is in the hunting episode. We are shown a lurking shadow figure that's meant to serve as the hook. It's meant to keep the viewer invested. What did he think this was? Is her father fearful of this or not? Well, he is, but only for a moment. Then Willie hops the fence and he kind of just follows her. During this episode, we see Willie as an MMA fighter firing imaginary arrows into her opponent as she yells out, "Bitch!" Or her as a chef working in a fancy restaurant. Or maybe her playing with a puppy. Who doesn't like cute puppies, right? Then her father is giving her reasons of why to stay on the reservation. Even he can't tell her why she should stay. Well, you can ride your bike. You can see things. There are res dogs here that need rescuing. She answers, "Yeah, res dogs. Nobody cares about them." I know that the writer wants us to think of these children or teens as the res dogs that no one cares about, but this still does not deliver us any characterization. Her father could have explained to her that she's never been on her own, that Callie is far away, that she won't have any family around her when she needs support. And she can bring up that living on the reservation surrounded by their family didn't help Daniel. At least then we would understand a little of what she might be feeling about his death. The writer chooses to ignore the fact that she was related to Daniel, whose suicide apparently affected her. We can only gather this by her tearing up while looking at his picture in her living room, where her reminder to the audience is conveyed via short dialogue of "miss you, cuz," or shallowly speaking about him with her dad on a hunting trip. It could be that the structure of these sad emotional scenes discussing suicide is poorly timed by blending it with comedic clips of her and her father on hunting camera that totally deflate the scene when it's supposed to convey the sadness or loss caused by Daniel's death. Are we supposed to be laughing 30 seconds after what's meant to be a heavy emotional scene? This highlights the random switches of emotion that the writer needs to be aware of. Once the writer is pulling at the audience's heartstrings, creating a funny hunting montage isn't smart, unless we're not to take these characters' emotional states seriously. The other problems within some of these spiritual episodes will be addressed later on. Oh, believe me, I haven't forgot about those. Now back to addressing the last of the core cast. Let's talk about Alora, whom in my opinion was one of the least likable and uninteresting of the group. She had potential, and this is what makes me feel so disheartened. We know that she needs to get off the res. Why? Well, her friend committed suicide, of course. Why did he want to go? He never says, though we see numerous flashbacks where the writer could have told us something about who he was or what he wanted. After all, Daniel's death will still haunt her when she leaves the res, won't it? So then, is she a dreamer? No, she has no real aspirations, even if she were to make it to Callie. And if she does, they don't tell us what they are or how to feel about them. She often swings from one emotional extreme to another with no explanation. She has a job at the casino, which is mentioned once in passing, easily missed in an episode with the coach, whose character is sadly more rounded out than hers is. He says to her that having this job at the casino is tragic, though we never hear what the job is, being that she's under 21. We're just told that this is tragic. Show us why this job is bad. Show us her having to support herself in a job she believes is below her. Show us people calling her a has-been ball player who thought she was going places. Show me something to humanize her. Give me something for her to run away from. Now back to the coach episode. She is using her grandmother's filthy car, whom she says is mean as ever. They don't talk anymore. Well, you must at least interact since you're using her car. For a driving test, you failed many times before driving the same car. This makes me doubt her as a character and not trust what she says to be truthful. We have a situation where she can't park. She pretends to cry and the coach attempts to do it for her. She smirks to herself as he circles the car. Now, emotional manipulation isn't normally something you see a writer choose as a character trait when building their protagonist. The coach gets a phone call and drives to a hotel. She makes no decisions to oppose him or help him. And it isn't until someone begins to shoot at her that she chooses to leave. We could see that Alora really does care for her former coach, maybe by having her help him. She could say, "Hey, I know your daughter. I'll try to help you get her out of there." She could have backed the car up and told him, "I'll wait. Make sure that you make it back out of there safe." Nope. Instead, we see her sit there. She's just present as craziness ensues. After her fight with Bear over money she lent him, she's angry because, the writer needs her to be for the story to happen. This isn't great writing and it's not organic.
Does she have a mental disorder? Bipolar, perhaps? I'm not using this as an insult, rather an actual condition that occurs on reservations. This might work to explain some of her actions or make us sympathetic to her hot and cold demeanor. Now we'll address her mother, Cookie's mysterious death. We native viewers are meant to believe that she lived her entire life on her home reservation, only to be told in her late teens how her mother died. Are you serious? They live on a reservation, but only now someone tells her the truth? It's not her family or her mean grandmother who tells her this. It was the coach who finally reveals this truth to her of how her mother died. He knew this because he was an old drinking buddy to her dead mother. This is a strange narrative choice, to say the least. Having lived my entire life on 2 separate reservations, the one thing that Native people love to do is talk amongst themselves, especially about tragic situations. The death of a parent, in my own childhood experience, normally will serve as a warning to the child. They'll often say, "Don't drink. You know what happened to your mom or dad." It's not ever done in malice. They may not even be trying to hurt the family that they're speaking about. It just makes its way back to the affected people. This is where the writer could have highlighted some of the issues of growing up on a reservation where everyone knows everyone else's business from childhood to adulthood, the good and the bad. She surely would have known this before now. She might have felt some way about it. Perhaps a better motivation for her to leave would have been for her to distance herself from her mother's legacy on that res. At least we would see who she was by the decisions that she's making. Explaining to us why it's so important that she leave and why she feels she can't do this alone. This is one of the eccentricities that make living on a reservation problematic. Now moving on to the most deliberate and insulting lack of character development, Daniel, whom is arguably the pivotal character, whose death is meant to push the narrative forward and impact the entire cast, though we don't see how. It's explained by the others that he was the leader of the group. Unsure as to why, since we didn't get any scenes or flashbacks showing us his character that identifies him as the leader. But this is a problem that's mirrored in all of the core cast, so I'm not really sure if that even needs to be said. He's dead at the beginning of the story, and the question of how is not slowly uncovered, but rather told to us bluntly by a scene at the end of the season. The core reasons of what created the circumstances of his death, or how it impacts his friends, is never explained. Why did he commit suicide? Do his friends talk about problems within his family that may have caused this? Does Willie, who is a blood relation, even mention this to her father on the hunting trip? No, of course not. What they do choose to show us about Daniel via flashback is him being impatient, screaming how he's tired of this and scaring away any game after hours of hunting in the forest. This is not characterization, since most teens are impatient. He just comes off as a jerk. The other two laugh about his outburst, of course. "Old crazy Daniel, he sure was a character." This is not what you want if your intent is for the audience to feel sad when his inevitable death scene occurs. It's not the showing of someone hanging in an abandoned building that causes an emotional reaction in the viewer. It's showing us who this person was. I expected to know more about the dead boy in the picture by the end of the season. What was shown was all the surface scenes that should have been cut in lieu of showing us who this boy was, why they liked him, what made him special. I believe it would have been a better use of time to characterize Daniel throughout the show. Show us his struggle, his inner turmoil. Highlight the ways that each of his friends attempt to connect with him and prevent the inevitable. His struggles could have been anything, really. But by the end of the season, after each of the core cast has attempted to prevent this, he dies by his own hand anyway. Then, via flashback, we could see why he was a pivotal character. We would see what made him a leader. We could feel the loss or understand the hole that is left inside of each of them because of his suicide. It wouldn't be the fulfilling of Daniel's dream, but simply because they believe in being dedicated friends, not because they needed to leave, but because they understand how much Daniel needs them. That Daniel, above all else, values the support that only they could provide to him. It would allow us to see this group as an admirable group of friends, each dealing with this horrible situation of their friend's death in their own way. This is what makes a character feel realistic. This is what makes a show memorable. It's the human part of the characters, the part of the person that gets back up and faces the world despite being knocked down or hurt badly. This is what causes us to admire a character's unwillingness to give up. When Daniel leaves the bar with Alora at the end of the season and has nowhere to go, give us a reason why each of them can't have him crash at their place. Maybe him going to each of them. Perhaps Bear wasn't home, instead being somewhere else with his mother. Why couldn't he ask Willie to stay there? What was the reason he didn't at least try to seek her out? Did they have a fight? If not, then she would have a reason to feel guilt or anger even toward her own family for not helping him off the streets. Each of these are decisions that are to be made by the writer, so how or why is still up to them. Still show what happened to get Daniel to this point, and it can't be, well, he had too much to drink and made a split decision to end his life. Each of these characters needs to feel a sense of not doing enough to help him in his time of need. They need to voice their guilt or shame, because that is what realistically happens when a person decides to take their own life. Not just how a native character might respond, but anyone who has regret at the death of someone who committed suicide. This is something anyone of any race could connect to and understand. Maybe asking themselves, what would I have done had that been me? Now, this show is meant to be a dramedy, but it focuses way too much on cheap laughs. The "oh yeah, fight if you want to" clinic scene, or "I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean, and I'm from San Diego." It's the receptionist's bored responses during the clinic scene that pulls the show down. Now, I'm not saying that the writer needs to leave all these parts out, but that they need to be balanced out with characterization scenes. We can have all of these scenes, but only if it pushes the narrative forward, not because we haven't had a laugh in about 3 minutes, so here's something else that's crazy. It's a lack of slow, quiet character building scenes that are missing when they are crucial. If you want to show Cheese meeting with an old lady in the clinic whom she believes is her grandson, but they share no relation, fine. But show why he is doing this. Maybe he explains to her how no one in his family speaks to him, or is even kind to him, or listens to him. Make me understand why he never talks about his family. I'd like to know who these characters are. Take the time to do that, and even non-natives could understand what it's like to feel invisible. They spend too much time on shallow gags, moving one to the next, rather than providing us real characters who we want to understand.
It's the way that the non-existent plot structure is handled that seems to cause the most problems. The lack of character motive, as well as the meandering plot line, only feeds into the many problems that exist in this show. Representation is crucial in media, but it shouldn't be the whole of the narrative. For an episodic, long-running show to work, we need not only to connect with the characters, but also understand them. They will be required to have a goal. One of the musts when constructing a solid storyline that works. We need to understand this goal that the characters are striving towards to keep the audience invested. Writing has rules that work. If they are left out, the story suffers because of it. We shouldn't feel obligated to watch a show because representation is important, but because we care about these characters. This is where the show fails. This may work in a 2-hour script for a movie like Smoke Signals or Friday, where the slice of life narrative would arguably work, but when you're investing 8 hours of time, it better be worth it in the end. Reservation Dogs' style of comedy seems to be, hey, I recognize this. That was a death scene from Platoon. Or, oh, this is an obvious shout out to a Tarantino film that I remember. When there is no reason for your characters to be wearing suits for a scene other than being a nod to a better written film, you failed. I care about the success of native narratives. I want for this show to do well. There are still ways that the writer can achieve a well-structured narrative filled with realistic characters. This is why I've decided to go in so deeply on the issues that are apparent in Reservation Dogs. We as Native people deserve well-written stories that highlight what it is like to be an Aboriginal person in North America. The characters deserve better. The audience deserves better. When a writer chooses to make representation the whole of the narrative, it won't connect with anyone other than those who are watching because we want to see natives on TV. The problem isn't that we can't handle comedy poking fun at race. It's that insults are not comedy. The narrative needs to build toward a climax. The characters need stakes and failures as well as successes. We have become disillusioned with the rushing out of representation narratives before asking ourselves, is this well written? Is it polished enough? Will it not only draw in a native audience, but an audience of those who would like to understand Aboriginal people? Are the characters rounded? Do they seem like actual people and not puppets? I have no problem with poking fun at race so long as it's well thought out and intelligently written. So I hope that I gave you a few things to ponder when we take a look at the structuring and writing of Reservation Dogs. It's been greenlit for another season after all. There is still time for the writer to address some of these weaknesses in the narrative, and the story would be all the stronger for it. Now, my review of this show may not be all that kind, but it is honest. I hope in the next season some of the dead-end plot threads and the character issues might be addressed. When we applaud a show and ignore the blatant issues that are rife in it, if it doesn't change and we allow it to continue, we have no one to blame but ourselves. So if you agree, or heck, if you disagree, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be doing a few videos in the future regarding how some of the side characters or plot lines might have been ironed out. I hope that you join me for some of these. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like and subscribe.